Our group will be investigating speech errors in Japanese learners of English. We will start with phonetically related errors. First, we will analyze approximates, specifically L and R. L is an alveolar lateral approximate, which is a sound produced by placing the tip of the tongue on the alveolar ridge. It is a lateral sound because the airstream flows through the sides of the tongue. R is an alveolar approximate, which is a sound produced by raising the tip of the tongue and placing it near the alveolar ridge. These sounds are commonly referred to as liquids. However, most Japanese people cannot tell the difference between these liquids and is often used interchangeably. This is because these sounds do not exist in the Japanese phonetics, so this error is language related. So when learning English, some may try to pronounce these sounds with rarirurero. As a result, the sound that they produce is somewhat different from how native speakers would pronounce them. When pronouncing rarirurero, it is often described as the alveolar flap or tap. In terms of tongue position, it is in between the L and the R. For example, ball is pronounced as boru, boru. Collect is pronounced as correcto, correcto. Roll is pronounced as roru, roru. And Rolf is pronounced as rarufu, rarufu. Next, we will analyze fricatives, specifically F and V. Fricatives are sounds by loosely blocking the airflow and letting the sound travel through that obstruction. The voiceless labial-dental fricative F does not actually exist in the Japanese phonetics, so instead of expecting F, we would hear it pronounced as the voiceless bilabial fricative. So both lips are positioned closely together to produce the sound without the use of the teeth. For example, tough is pronounced as tau, tau, and fire is pronounced as huaya, huaya. For the V sound, there is no distinction with B. As a result, Japanese learners of English tend to not be able to tell the difference between these two sounds. For example, valve is pronounced as barubu, barubu, and evolve is pronounced as ebarubu, ebarubu. Again, this error is language related. Finally, we will analyze stops, specifically K and G. Stops are sounds produced by obstructing the airflow completely. For the most part, these sounds in Japanese are quite similar to its English counterparts. However, in English, the K can be aspirated. In Japanese, such aspirations do not exist. For example, Christmas is pronounced as Christmas, Christmas. Kind is pronounced as kaindo, kaindo. Good is pronounced as gutto, gutto. And Google is pronounced as Google, Google. Once again, these errors are language related.
So now we're going to be talking about the phonological errors Japanese speakers make when learning English. For error 1, Japanese syllables almost always follow a consonant-vowel pattern, such as Nico, meaning cat, and sayonara, meaning goodbye. So some exceptions are in words that include the N sound. These exceptions can be seen in words like Honda, panda. Japanese predominantly has open syllables, with the only exception being a syllabic nasal consonant. On the other hand, English always allows a wide variety of syllable types, including open and closed syllables. With this ingrained CV syllable pattern, Japanese learners face difficulties when producing English closed syllables and consonant clusters. For instance, Japanese speakers often experience difficulty in pronouncing closed CVC syllables in English and add a vowel to the end of a closed syllable to make the word conform to the Japanese consonant vowel pattern. Therefore, Japanese speakers may pronounce an English word with a closed syllable street as sutorito with 4 open syllables. And since it always follows a consonant by a vowel, the word test, they pronounce as testo, since it's expected to always end in a vowel. For error 2, many Japanese speakers struggle to pronounce A and I, so the word danger, D-A-N-G-E-R, would typically be spelled as D-E-N-G-E-R. This is probably because the letter A is not pronounced A in diphthong in Japanese. Similarly, the word kite, K-I-T-E, will be spelled as K-A-I-T. For error 3, the A and schwa sounds are pronounced like an A. So the word burn, turn, gull would be pronounced as barn, tarn, and gull, and they tend to elongate the schwa, whereas in English it is short. And for the last phonological error, Japanese language has less phonemes, so minimal pairs like feel and fill would both be file.
So our first error is plurality. A common mistake for Japanese learners of English is to not differentiate between the singular and plural forms of nouns, and only use the singular forms. For example, they may form phrases like a couple of months instead of a couple of months, or 12 marble instead of 12 marbles. This is a language-related error. In Japanese, words do not become plural the same way they do in English, by attaching the common s suffix or one of its variants, or changing the word itself. Instead, a number and a counter precedes the word, or it is simply known through context. The second error follows on the first. In a way, it's a reversal. This time, the error is because there's a plural where there shouldn't be, specifically looking at number-noun compounds. Examples of these compounds include a 10-foot pole or a $1 million deal. These may instead be spoken as a 10-feet pole or a $1 million deal. This is an error that many non-native speakers may struggle with because these compounds do not follow the typical pluralization rules in English. Non-native speakers may overgeneralize and then end up overcorrecting themselves. Another common error is the incorrect use of or lack of derivational affix or derivational affixes. This can take many forms. For example, the dropping of er, est in adjectives in favor of more. Small, smaller, and smallest would become small and more small. Adjectives that end in ing or ed may be interchanged. A sentence like, I am boring, may be spoken, but with the intended meaning of I am bored. And there is the dropping or adding of ly to adjectives where it is not needed. This can create phrases like, to be honestly, or they are constant being a bother, instead of to be honestly, and they are constantly being a bother. Despite their variations, most of these are language-related errors that come from how Japanese would normally construct their words. While Japanese definitely has affixes of their own, these are rarely a complete one-to-one for English. Taking the first example, in Japanese, there is no smaller or smallest form of the word small. Instead, the word for more is added before it. And while there are affixes to change an adjective to an adverb, or vice versa, like in the third example, the differences in the way Japanese would structure their sentences means that they are not used according to when English grammar would normally dictate them to be.
So now we're going to talk about syntactic errors Japanese learners of English would make. The first language-related error Japanese learners of English make is using the wrong grammar order. Japanese is an agglutinative language, which is a type of syntactic language with morphology that primarily uses agglutination. In English grammar, people follow the subject, verb, object order, and it would be I eat rice for the example above. But in Japanese grammar, the order is a bit different, which is subject, object, verb, and the example above will be I rice eat. The second language-related error is that Japanese speakers may habitually omit too much words when speaking English. Ellipsis is when you cut words from a sentence. Since Japanese is an agglutinated language, words can be used in a flexible way. However, English is not as flexible. One example is that did you go to the bank yesterday? In Japanese is you yesterday banked went. And in informal Japanese, the sentence is yesterday bank went. From the picture, we can see that while the sentence in Japanese has been cut by about 60%, the English sentence almost remains the same. The third error is that Japanese learners of English are not used to include pronouns and subjects in their conversations. This error is likely due to language-related and cultural factors. Japanese speakers don't use pronouns or subjects very much because it's a pro-drop language where certain pronouns can be omitted. However, it can be confusing for speakers if pronouns and subjects are omitted in an English conversation. We can see that in the example conversation, Japanese speakers don't need to use pronouns at all. However, in the English sentences, I, it, and you are needed, or the sentence is not complete. The fourth error is that Japanese learners can be confused of the tenses in English. Unlike English grammar, which has tenses ranging from past tense to the future tense, and each tense has 4 forms: simple, progressive, perfect, and perfect progressive. Japanese grammar only has 2 main verb tenses, past and present tense. And present tense is also used to describe future actions, and each tense has formal and informal form. The conjugations of present and past tense are provided below. And for future actions, with the context and extra information, Japanese speakers can understand that an action is said in the future.
One error commonly made by Japanese learners of English is the confusion of similar words, often due to the lack of equivalent terms in the two languages. For example, the word ugoku in Japanese often translates to move in English. However, the term can also mean to work or to function in other contexts. The Japanese sentence "toke ga ugokanai" would have the same meaning as "the clock doesn't work" in English, but a Japanese learner of English might say "the clock doesn't move" instead. This is a language-based error, as ugoku is a homophone in Japanese that translates into 2 different English words. The usage of English loanwords in Japanese may also cause the error of confusing Japanese terms with the actual English phrases when translating into English. In fact, a lot of terms thought to be loanwords from English are actually wasei eigo, or made in Japan English. An example of wasei eigo would be the term consento, which sounds similar to consent as in permission in English, but the term actually originates from concentric plug and refers to an electrical outlet. Therefore, a Japanese learner of English might ask, "Where is the consent?" when looking for a place to charge their phone. Another example would be skinship, which is a portmanteau of the English words skin and kinship and refers to physical intimacy. A Japanese learner of English might form a sentence such as, "Do you think that there is the right amount of skinship in that relationship?" To an English speaker that has never encountered wasei eigo, the meaning of these sentences would be lost. This error seems to be socially influenced. The modernization of Japan and the resultant incorporation of English words may have resulted in wasei eigo, and because these words are so commonly used in Japan, a learner might think that they are real English terms. Finally, another pragmatic error made by Japanese learners of English would be the loss of contextual meaning in translation. An example of this would be the phrase "zensho shimasu," which could directly translate to "I will undertake an action" or "I will do my best" in English. However, this phrase is actually used as a polite refusal in Japan. It is commonly used by politicians and business people to express the idea that they will do the best thing to be done in that situation, which is to do nothing. One of the most famous examples of this error was between the Japanese Prime Minister Eisaku Sato and American President Richard Nixon in the 1970s. Prime Minister Sato's translator translated this phrase to "I'll take care of it" to Nixon. Later on, this caused much confusion when Sato proceeded to not actually do anything. This could be an example of flouting the Gracian maxim of manner due to the ambiguity of the statement. The implicature of "zensho shimasu" in Japanese would be that a person would do nothing, but when translated to English, that contextual meaning is lost. This error could originate from a socio-cultural difference between Japan and America or other English-speaking countries. Iwamoto reports that an important value in Japan is peace, or harmony for the group. Because of this, Japanese speakers may have a tendency to avoid directly stating a refusal, which results in the usage of statements like "zensho shimasu" to refuse in a roundabout way.
Oftentimes, when learners of English make speech errors, it is an unfortunately common experience that they are laughed at by native speakers. However, speech errors actually play quite an important role in understanding the mechanisms of speech production, sentence structure, and spoken meaning. In the case of Japanese learners of English, we saw how speech errors highlight the main differences between the two languages. Ultimately, speech errors are made by all speakers, and we greatly benefit as a whole from analyzing how second language errors are made because they allow us to better understand people from all over the world. Thank you.